Hey everybody, welcome to our Ask Me Anything overflow video. This last Sunday we had so many amazing questions for the Ask Me Anything section that we just didn't have time, even in a very long service, to be able to answer all of those. So we had about 40 questions. We answered 7 or 8 of them on Sunday, and so we're going to do a few more today. But I was realizing as I was preparing all these answers, it's not even going to be possible to get them all today because I don't want to make a 3-hour video.
No.
I doubt you do either.
I don't.
So we're actually going to have a series of these videos coming out sort of each Wednesday over the next couple of weeks where we answer your questions. Here's the thing, and this provides us a great opportunity for something unique, is if you have questions about the responses to the questions, put them in the comment section and we can maybe pick up on those in later weeks as sort of like a tacking back, looking back at previous questions. But it's also an opportunity for you to continue to submit questions. So if you have a question about one of the answers or just a completely unrelated faith question, put it in the comment section to each one of these videos. And then we'll take a stab at it in the coming weeks. So today we're going to do 3 questions. And like all of your questions, they're really difficult and don't have easy answers, but we're going to do our best. So Amy, you want to start us off with the first one there?
Absolutely. So I was actually going to say, let's start with the really easy one as a little bit of a joke.
Yeah, this one. Yeah, I think, yeah.
So here's our first question for today. Why is it that our natural mammalian characteristics, our competitiveness, selfishness, tribalism, are focused on survival? Why is it that they seem so counter to what Jesus calls us to be? Go for it.
Yeah. That was one that I remember seeing that and I thought, well, that's a really great observation. And I don't really have an answer for that other than, I mean, there's the very simple dogmatic Christian answer to that, which is, we are all human beings this side of the fall. That's just the nature of humanity. Yet at the same time, we appeal to the nature of humanity both directions at times, don't we?
Yes.
Particularly when we talk about centering our life in Jesus as being sort of like the firstborn of the new creation, that element of theology. The simple answer for why is that's just result of the fall, what it means to live on earth, however one interprets the fall. I will say for me, this line of questioning is where I most identify with the good news. Like the good news means something to everyone differently. You're all going to have your own sort of interpretation of what the good news is. And there's going to be similarities. We might have similar ones, but for me, when I think of Christ, what Christ is doing in my life, and the good news for me is the ability for that hesed, that long-suffering love, to override my selfish instincts or to challenge me to be selfless and self-giving. That is the nature of good news. I know that's a big debate a lot in this world where people, especially because the church has gone through so much controversy of just asking the question, what's the point of Christianity, or what's the point of going to church? And I heard Nadia Bolz-Weber talk about this, the debate of, do you need someone outside yourself in order to change? And I would fully agree with her. Yes, I do.
Right.
And so to me, the good news is this power given to us in salvation of Christ to try to override those things, to be better people, to be more Christ-like. As part of the why, we'll work that out at a later date. But I think that's why, I would commend the faith I've received and have been brought into to anyone, because I think it has forced me to examine those, as the author of this question put, mammalian characteristics, right. And to work through community, through systems implemented by that community, through all of those things to try to examine those harmful tribal characteristics and to try to subvert them. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think you just picked up on the word that I kind of cued in on in the question, which is the tribalism part of that. So I'm going to throw you a little follow-up curveball question.
Terrific. Yeah.
So there's a lot of people who talk about the kin of God
Mhm.
instead of the kingdom of God. So how do you think that kind of interpretation relates to this question, if it does?
Now, do you mean the use of the language of kingdom as intentionally anti-colonial?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm sure it does. It's not something I've spent a lot of time recently
Yeah.
thinking about. Yourself? I mean, yeah.
No, I mean, I think that when we look at the story of Jesus and what he was trying to do, so colonialism, that's one part of that. But I think if we go back to the Gospels and look at Jesus, that ever expanding circle, I think that really gets to what this question is about. I think that Jesus is always expanding that invitation to a transformed life, which I think is kind of battling against that mammalian nature.
Yeah, I'd heard a podcast recently was talking about some of those tribal elements, and they were saying part of the reason tribalism has become such a problem in our modern society is that previous generations, primarily when we were much more like regional powers, you didn't have to worry about tribalism as much because you didn't see the other tribes.
Right.
And now we live in this globalized world where, like, if I want to right now, I could pull up my phone or a tablet or a computer or turn on a TV and be able to see all of these other tribes that put me into conflict. I mean, I think we'll get to that. There's some elements that I think mash up with the later question we're going to address. But boy, that feels like a particular challenge right now. And where that language of kingdom is interesting, because it sees the circle of faith you're in as one that continues to envelop, not even envelop, that's probably a bad word, but continues to expand to include others, as opposed to, I think envelop could mean, could take on a manipulative a view. But an ever expanding concentric circle. Yeah. Yep.
So that's fully answered then.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
All right, so we will move on to question 2. You ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay, so question 2 is, I want to ask about the devotional Jesus Calling. Some folks say this devotional is blasphemous because the author, Sarah Young, didn't really receive those messages from Christ. What do you think?
So I'm not super familiar with this devotional. I know you and I have talked about this. I know my wife and I have talked about this because it's a very popular devotional.
Very.
And if I'm right, it's a devotional where a lot of it is as though Jesus is speaking to you. Is that correct?
Yes, Jesus calling is calling to you.
Okay.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, also, we had realized today that the author of this, Sarah Young, just actually passed away yesterday.
Yes.
And so I was going to say, I'm going to put a couple links in the comments there. I actually read a little bit earlier, a really nice write-up from Religious News Service about her. She was apparently very media shy, despite having an incredibly popular devotional. The Tennessean also had a really nice write-up about her. I'll put both those links and also some links I'll reference later there in the comment section. Make sure to, or in the notes and information, check that out. So that being said, I don't think I can't answer that in a hyper-specific way about any particular devotion, but what I can say is I think since we are created in the image of God, that image comes with the sense of imagination. And in the same way, if we're married or have a significant other or with our kids, whoever, we could imagine speaking in their voice because we feel like we know them. I think in the same way we can imagine speaking in the voice of Jesus. And so I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with in a wholly imaginative sense. Because my guess is anyone picks up that devotional doesn't think that they are literally reading the Bible or literally reading a divinely given message to someone. And I would suspect from what little I know about the author, she's not trying to portray it as that. And so in that sense, like with any other devotional or religious-based work, you are always being asked to use your sense of discernment, whether you think Jesus would say something like this. And it's entirely possible in engaging that devotion, you could have one that moves you to tears and it actually feels like from what you know of Jesus, this is something Jesus say to you. And it might be possible you read another that you don't see it, but that's your discernment at work. And so I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with that, but it also means that if you're going to do that, use your holy imagination to speak for God or speak for Jesus. It's incumbent on you to try to do that to the best of your ability within what you know of the character of Jesus as revealed through experience, as revealed through Scripture. I think, I think that's a worthy thing. There's certainly a long tradition in media of trying to do that. There's a movie, it doesn't age well, but there's a movie called Jesus of Montreal that's attempting to sort of like put Jesus into a contemporary setting and change Jesus's words. We talk all the time when we see characters in film as messianic figures. And so this is our holy imagination seeing that there. So I think it's not that hard. As a pastor, I feel like I do that very often, is to say, if Jesus were to say to you here today, he would say, I love you, I value you. Does that mean if Jesus walked in our midst, would have said those exact words? Probably not. But that's because I'm not Jesus. But if Jesus walked in our midst and heard me say that, my guess is Jesus would be like, yeah, I'm all right with that.
That's fine.
That's fine. I think that's the weird way of explaining. I think that's where that kind of falls in. And so I have no inherent problem with it. And I say that also as to say that's not a blanket like affirmation of the devotional. I just don't. I know people love it. It seems to be life-giving for many individuals, so I have no reason to condemn it. But the idea that one would speak in that Jesus voice, there's nothing inherently blasphemous about that. We all do that. I mean, to be fair, as God bearers, everything we do is an act of speaking for Jesus. Right. So,
And not only with words, but also with our actions.
Exactly, and that's what I was getting at. So if it gives you life, keep doing it, but make sure it's, you're discerning whether you think Jesus would actually say these things, which is, to be frank, very difficult right now, because there's many, many folks trying to say what Jesus is saying that I certainly would not agree with. Yeah.
Right.
Yep. All right.
Discernment in all things.
Yes.
Okay, so our final question then for today is, what are some ways for the church to support people who may be experiencing an existential crisis and questioning their place in the world as artificial intelligence is at our doorstep?
Okay, so when I read that, I wasn't sure if the existential crisis they were referring to was something on its own or if it was in directly relationship to AI. So I'm going to answer this three different ways. I'm going to answer it as there's an existential crisis because one has one. There is worries about AI, and then there's existential crisis caused by worries of AI.
Right.
Okay, so I'll answer it, all those sort of things. So I heard a podcast recently where the host was speaking with someone, and they used this term, and it was called evolutionary mismatch.
Okay.
And so what they meant by that was, if you think about the scope of human history, as things changed, we began to grow accustomed to a certain rate of change. Iron Age to Bronze Age to the, subtle advances in technology, solar cold, and then, as we said, tribes start colliding, change speeds up. But very much, in many ways, I think our rate of change in many ways mirrors a lot of the data we've seen on global warming, where you just talk about these year-over-year averages, and then you look over the last 50, and it's just this spike. And it can very much feel like we are in a insane rate of acceleration right now. And I think evolutionary mismatch comes out in a lot of ways, which is the one I say this to myself and others all the time. If you ever go in a convenience store and you look down the candy aisle and you just say, is this good for me to know that any moment I can just pull over and say,
Sure.
I feel like a Twix, I feel like a bag of Doritos, which that's more my weakness, to be fair, than Twix. So our access to nutrient-rich food and our food sciences that are just making Doritos more and more tasty by the moment. Your exposure to information, the sheer number of ads you would see when you go anywhere. You know, I'm a really big fan of baseball. I try to watch highlights, and I realized the other day I was getting so annoyed trying to watch highlights of a game because I couldn't see a highlight without them. I couldn't see a 10-second highlight without having to watch a 15-second car commercial. But my brain has not evolved to handle that, just as the same way my brain and belly have not evolved to be able to handle access to delicious Doritos all the time. And then, like I said, the rate of change. And so I think within that setting, existential crisis, which I think most anyone's going to face because we're humans and we are finite, and whether it's through aging, life change, status change, job change, change in relationships, it's going to happen. But I think what's unique is it is happening in this moment of mismatch. At the same time, a lot of the tools we would use to weather that have been deconstructed. So some of the crises that I would highlight right now, you know, the obvious one for folks is all the mental health outcomes and effects of traveling through a global pandemic,
Right.
And how that in many ways caused society to further tribalize and
Definitely.
divide. Within that, there's also, I would also highlight two unique sort of crises that are happening in there. One is a teen mental health crisis. If you're familiar with the researcher, Jonathan Haidt wrote an article in his Substack recently about we can actually now see through the data that social media is a cause of mental health. It wasn't just an accelerant or something that affected it, is now a cause. And you would think, hey, you know, well, we'll just get kids off that. But the problem is that is their social network. So that's like akin to saying, kids, we're just going to take you from all your friends.
Right. Now you'll be alone.
Now you'll be alone. And so I actually have a link to this article I'm going to put in the notes there. So make sure and check that out. It's great. At the same time, we've been a little slower to talk about this, but there's a pretty significant mental health crisis with men in particular. And I think this relates back to that evolutionary mismatch. So our society, all these growths we've had to call out harmful or restrictive understandings of masculinity and how that has affected patriarchal power settings and have been so harmful to women that what's the phrase, to those in privilege, any loss of privilege seems like persecution.
Right.
That's a really apt phrase. I think what is happening to a lot of men, that loss of power can make them feel persecuted, even though there aren't. But what I think what happens is when you take that status away, but at the same time, we've been condemnatory of a lot of very harmful aspects of masculinity. At the same time, we've not tried to develop healthy ways to affirm that, affirm certain aspects of masculinity. And so there's and to some extent that even that discussion has been like a toxic battleground because there's a segment of society, albeit small but loud, that just there's probably no proactive way to talk about this. And so all those things are happening. There's I would actually refer you to, there's a Ezra Klein podcast. He's a great interviewer for the New York Times, did a podcast about a month ago with a psychologist about this that I'm going to put a link there to listen to. It's really interesting. So all these things are happening at the same time. So the first part, existential crises are real for a variety of reasons. And they are probably a normal part of life as a result of change, but they are also happening in this environment where you have a lot of more complicated layers overlaying, and a lot of the things that we rely on to help people in those have evaporated. So there's that. I'll put that there. Second one, worries about AI. I would say, like all technology, artificial intelligence is not inherently good or inherently bad. The question is how we use it and what it develops into. And to me, the really important question is the unintended consequences that result from some of the locked-in effects of this. So an example I would use for this is years and years ago, 60s, 70s, I can't remember the gentleman's name, in Asheville, North Carolina, invented a piece of technology called MIDI. MIDI was this electronic way of how we can play music. It had become the industry standard. About you hit a note on a keyboard here, it triggers a sound that all of a sudden this little plastic keyboard can sound like an enormous pipe organ. You know, it's developed this. And so he develops this technology, becomes the industry standard, and essentially it judges what key you hit and how fast you hit it. But that's about all the data it has on it. And anyone who's played a piano or any other stringed instrument realizes there's much more data. I mean, you can hit that key and it's going to sound like a violin, but it's not the same. You can't do the same,
Right.
Vibratos or the little, imperfections. And so because of that, because of this technology that was invented, 50 years ago that has become the industry standard, we now exist with these limitations of what we can do. And so it's forced the music industry to say, hey, how can we invent new ways to do electronic music? Mm-hmm. So I think any piece of technology is going to function like that. Mm-hmm. I was talking to somebody on Sunday about how just, the size of railroad cars and shipping containers create direct effects on the size of things that we need, and what we can do. And so AI is going to have elements like that. Those locked in consequences. And then the second part of that is how we use it. So this is a rather crude example, but it's one I heard recently. When we think about technology, a factory employs 100 workers making parts for small air compressors. A new technology is invented that can do the work of 50 to 80 workers at less than half the cost. What does the owner of the factory do? So the answer that so many people would jump to is like, well, it's unfortunate. Right. It's unfortunate. That's just the way technology advances. We're going to buy this. That's the market demands it. We are going to buy this technology. We're going to implement it. Mm-hmm. We're going to lay off 50 to 80 workers, and we'll continue being a profitable company. And to so many people that's the only answer. That's the logical answer. But we have somehow never considered the possibility that we could use technology to enhance our lives as opposed to maximize profit. We've never considered the possibility that all these employees could be retained, could work less while making the same amount of money, and somehow mutually benefit the company as a whole. That just seems pie in the sky to us. Mm-hmm. And so it's been an argument that capitalism co-opts all technology into its uses. Mm-hmm. And we don't often, I think we're sold the promise that it'll enhance our quality of life. No, don't get me wrong. I am very happy we don't live in the age of the Industrial Revolution where people are living into their 30s in London and dying of black lung. I'm glad we don't live in that. But we still, at every technological advance, have the choice of what to do with said technology, and we have been reluctant to do so often in the West because of perceptions about market or how technology is used. And so I want to say AI can be a powerful tool to crunch big data to find out new cures. I mean, we were using AI and big data to help come up with some of our non-traditional things to help, some of the antacids and things like that that tended to help with COVID earlier. Right. Big data was able to do that. We use big data in biblical scholarship, which is amazing because we have access to, as I said on Sunday, 5,800 different manuscripts of things. And so you can search word usage across all of ancient Greece to better understand the lexicon, which is amazing. You can use it potentially to automate portions of your life that would have been headaches in the past, to allow us to, book meetings, write emails, do responses in ways that take up that mental, emotional energy. All those things are potential for there to save us time and energy, but you have to answer why. And I think for a lot of people, it's to save that time and energy so I could be more productive. And if that's the answer, I don't think AI is ever going to make us more happy. Mm-hmm. It's just going to make rich people richer. Right. And so I think that would be my response to the AI part of it. It is people are going to use it. Mm-hmm. And companies now, are racing to implement it in ways. And but we, as a society, get a choice to participate in that conversation, how it's being used. Mm-hmm. And if it is a tool to create a better society, it's upon us to advocate for that both in conversations about our attitudes and ideologies, and potentially, and probably most impactfully, in the legislative sphere of how that technology is implemented. Because it is powerful, and we've passed a point. this house is, or this moose is out of the barn. I don't know. That's probably not a real idiom, but that's what I'm going to say. The toothpaste is out of the tube. It's not getting back
No,
in here.
it's going to always be the moose is out of the barn.
Well, I watched a video the other day of the first day of spring where Switzerland lets the cows out of the barn, and the cows are so happy.
Love that
Have
video.
you seen that? It's great. It's great. I'm gonna put that video.
Yeah,
I'm gonna try to put that video.
We'll definitely
there.
link that
It's
one.
great. They're so happy and running, and that's what I was thinking about. But I don't know why I said moose, because who keeps a moose in a barn? But yeah, that's what I say. So finally, so the existential crisis, the concern about AI, and how those things can overlap. At this point, I'm just defining these problems. I'm going to link to a video here that the Lausanne, it's an international mission conference did. It's a history of the church. It's really cool. But one of the things they do so great in this video is every couple hundred years, the church and humanity has this existential crisis where they say, and everyone thought the world was going to end.
Mm-hmm. Right.
You may have had those experiences in your life, particularly if you were living through nuclear scares, or right now where it feels like our society is going to, rattle itself apart. Mm-hmm. They can have this impression that the world's going to end, and yet we adapt and we change through that. And to me, this video is great. You should watch it. There's 2 of them. It's about 20 minutes. Give you a good sense of the history of the church. But what it will also do to you is to say, I think maybe to get us away from sort of like histrionic thinking. Mm-hmm. We can feel the midst of that existential crisis in one hand, and I'm not telling you it's not real. It certainly is real. But on the other hand, we could sort of have the hopeful perseverance. And I think that's a nice perspective. But what I would say to the response to all those things is, what the church can do best to all those things is a pretty common answer, which is be a place that offers true community. Now, this relates to an answer I had on Sunday where I was referencing this great Atlantic article talking about why church attendance is really cratered in a way that people just aren't paying attention to, which is frankly that our culture the way we live our lives and our values seem to be incompatible with participating in church. Mm-hmm. And it's an economic and values thing. So I'll link to the article. It's great there. But there's a couple lines from that article I want to highlight here. It says, the problem is that many Americans have adopted a way of life that has left us lonely, anxious, and uncertain of how to live in community with other people because we have eroded that. But what we need is community marked by sincere love, sharing what they have from each other according to their ability and to each according to their need, eating together regularly, generously serving neighbors, and living lives of quiet virtue and prayer. Like, I if there's a prescription, that's it. I think the next step is the problem is like, how we get from here to there. I'm not 100% sure. And, frankly, as your pastor, that's the thing that I probably spend the most time thinking about right now. And not having a lot of inspiration about right now. And so I'm with you on that existential crisis question because I feel it as well. But to me, the answer is still true community. And I think all you need for confirmation of that is anytime you've had a conversation with a good friend that you walk away and you feel lighter from. I mean, it just reminds you that like a lot more things are possible when you are regularly engaging those type of relationships. And our church certainly has those, had them in the past, has them now, continues to serve each other through the deacons. And we're a deeply connected, affectionate church that's there for one another. The big challenge is how can we be more in each other's lives, and how can we bring others into this concentric circle, or how can this circle grow to bring more folks in, because it's so desperately needed. If you're feeling the existential crisis in whatever form, whether personally or culturally, you're not alone in that. And so I think there's power in people seeking healing together. So if that's something you've been thinking about and you want to engage in that conversation, please reach out to me, email me, shane@hborough.org, call me. I'd love to talk to anyone about their thoughts about that, because I think getting some folks together and talking about how to be community right now is something we need to do.
Mhm.
So, any thoughts?
Well, I think that phrase, that not alone, is
Mhm.
probably the summation of a lot of what we just talked about, honestly. Like the confirmation that we are not alone through all of these challenges.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I know that was a lot, but that's why we're doing multiple videos, because the questions, they get really much easier. I'm just kidding. They're all great. They're all great questions. I appreciate the depth of thought our folks have. There's no question too small, too big. We'll do our best with any one of them. But thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week. Take care. Bye.